Hello and welcome to Getting Your Money's Worth, the show that focuses on value. I'm Judith West, and our guest today is Marcus Winters, Senior Fellow at Manhattan Institute and education guru there. Is that right to say?
Sure.
Hi. Thanks for being on the show, Marcus.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Yeah, Marcus, I was reading, some notes on the internet, getting ready for you. And I read some statistics that an American kid drops out of high school something like every 21 or 26 seconds. And really the average rate of high school graduates in urban areas can be 50% or even less. I mean, these are not statistics dropping out that Americans are proud of.
Right, and actually, I don't think everyone in America knows that the numbers are really that low.
Yeah, but exactly. So I don't get it. You've been studying education. We've been reading about education reform. We're going to get into some of the things that Washington has on the agenda now. Some folks say an American kid even drops out every 10 seconds. And then at the same time, I read in the Times not long ago, the Journal, it costs $210,000 per kid to house a kid in some kind of a state residence facility because they dropped out of school and didn't have a future. Mm-hmm. What is it that in America we can't fix education?
That's a pretty big question. So how do we fix American public education?
I said you were an education. I said you were an education guru.
Yeah, I mean the story of American public education really is. I mean, you're right. The numbers are much more dire than I think most people realize. It's depending on the estimate, the high school graduation rate is somewhere between 70 and 75%. For minority students, it's much lower.
Right.
It's 50 to 55% for African American and Hispanic students.
Right.
And additionally, the story there is that it hasn't really got much better since about the mid-1970s. So on really every measure of educational attainment that we have, whether it be test scores, graduation rates, all of those things have really been pretty flat since about 1975. And meanwhile, during that time, we've more than doubled the amount, adjusting for inflation, per pupil that we spend on public education. So we're spending a lot more. In any other industry, we would call that a productivity crisis, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
What business do you double your investment?
Where on the planet Earth is there any asset class or business class that spends more and gets less?
Right, and if you did that in your business, your answer would not be double up again, right?
No, you'd be out of business.
Right. The argument in education has always been to spend more money. Though I think we're starting to get away from that. I mean, I think we have made progress in the last decade or so, and which is starting to show up a little bit on test scores, but through modern reforms, which are really taking the form of accountability policies and also school choice policies, are having some positive effects. I think the next big step are policies related to teacher quality, which is performance pay programs and the like. So we have a long way to go.
We're going to get into performance. Let's go back to one of the things that you said has created some hope, some improvement, and that's these private school choices. Private school choices, namely charter schools, they have more of a business model, right?
Many of them do.
Many of them do.
Definitely the private.
And as a matter of course, they were started because there were plenty of folks in education that felt that there may be some competition would improve the core public schools. We mentioned this briefly before. We talked about that. Have you found any fallout to the improvement of public schools as a result of school choice?
Actually, no. I mean, so the argument against school choice that many people say is that even if it helps the students who go to charter schools, who go to private schools, it's going to hurt the kids who stay in the public schools. Which you can make a story, you can tell a story there, right? The best and brightest kids leave, resources leave along with them. My research that I've done here in New York and some other places, and actually which is consistent with the research everyone else is doing across the country, suggests that actually there are mild benefits to the students who stay in the public schools when their classmates leave for alternatives. Okay. Now, they're pretty mild benefits, so I don't think, it's not a major reason.
Nothing to get excited about.
Right, those effects aren't, but what is to be excited about, so particularly here in New York, we know that the kids who go to the charter schools are benefiting dramatically from the experience. Now, if we can benefit those kids without harming the kids who stay in the public schools and even making them a little bit better, that's a really good policy and something we should pursue.
But let me ask you something. Shouldn't there be a greater goal? For one thing, I want to dispel this notion, if I can, if you will, that charter schools skim off the creme de la creme.
Right. They don't.
What have you found?
Charter schools are very different from place to place. So there certainly are charter schools that are that do try to focus on the higher end kids. So it does exist. But as a rule, generally, particularly, definitely here in New York, but also other places across the country, the general story is that the kids who go to charter schools are kids who generally have problems in their public schools. Right? If you're doing well in your public school, you're not really often looking for an alternative.
Nor is your parent eager to change you.
Right. So in most cases, charter schools are the kids who are going to charter schools are kids who are performing poorly in their public schools. They tend to be much more likely to be minority and lower income. So they really are not creaming the best and brightest kids.
And aren't they also getting less money?
Yes.
Charter schools, I want to say it now, and please, if I'm wrong, you correct me here. Charter schools are public schools.
Charter schools are public schools.
Okay, fine. And aren't they really spending less per kid than the neighboring public school?
As a general rule, yes. It's a little hard to talk about charter schools as one monolithic thing because charter schools operate under different rules in different states. But in most states, in New York and in most other states, charter schools do get less money per pupil than do the public schools. So here in New York, and it's also common in several other states. So the charter schools get a little bit less per pupil for each student, and they get no capital costs. Okay. So they have to get their own leases. Right.
Okay, so let's go. The name of this show is we're getting your money's worth. So I'm going to say, charter schools have, if not the same mix as public schools, maybe an even higher at risk. They're getting less money, and their benefits are superior.
Right.
And there's a little bit of some mild benefits. I think that was the word you used. Why shouldn't that model be a model that's followed in our public schools that have more money, more longevity? They've been in business for how many hundred and some odd years, and have greater resources. Why shouldn't there be some transfer of what we've learned about what's good? Any other business markets would look at its neighbor and say, gee, if he's found a niche that's working for him, why wouldn't I copy some of that niche?
Right, and one of the ideas of charter schools is to serve as laboratories for the public school system. Though I think less of that goes on. The public schools are adopting less of those policies than we might like. Part of the reason for that, and one reason it's tough to say that that they should be doing that though, is that charter schools themselves are very different from each other. So you have the KIPP academies that are focused on really high standards for their kids. You have other schools that are focused on really bringing in high quality teachers and focus on them. You have the places that are experimenting with different curricula and the like. So I think the lesson really is that what matters here is choice. So the difference is that the public school system is one large school system. Charter schools allow you to sort yourself into the school that's best for your kid, which is something difficult to bring directly into the public schools.
But there are a lot of folks that believe, and you mentioned something about teacher quality, and let's get into that. There are a lot of folks that believe that one of the reasons charter schools, the commonality among charter schools, is that they are less rigid, they are less union dominated, there is more flexibility in terms of the actual running of the school, and that maybe the teachers are qualified better educationally or motivationally or whatever things are said. There's some sense of commonality in teacher performance and teacher quality.
Well, I think the autonomy that charter schools have, right. So they're not subject to collective bargaining agreements the same way that the public school system. So tenure rules they don't have as strongly. They can pay the good teachers a little bit more to try to encourage them to go on. They can get rid of their bad teachers if they don't like them. And actually, I've made my new thing whenever I talk to charter school people, principals of charter schools. One of the questions I'm always sure to ask them is, how much of your success do you think comes from the fact that if you think a teacher's not doing well, you can get rid of that teacher, or your ability to have an influence on your staff that you might not have had in your public school. And every charter school principal I've ever asked that question to has told me that they think it's everything.
Well, it's a little bit like 101 business. I mean, there are not that many industries where you can underperform and keep getting increases and have lifetime guarantee of a job.
Right. The employment
How did that
system,
ever start?
It has a long pedigree, actually,
history.
and it's longer than I think most people realize. I mean, back in as of like 1910, there were people talking about in New York about how 99% of teachers were evaluated as satisfactory, and they were all getting something that looked like tenure. So it's been around for a very long time. I think that what you're hitting on is that the way that we employ public school teachers in the United States is almost exactly backwards. So the way that we employ public school teachers is we make them go through a series of screens, go through training in education schools and the like. So they enter the classroom where we give them a lot of autonomy. After 3 years, if you stick around for 3 years, you basically have a job guarantees for life. And after that, we pay you more money for your years of experience and for the credentials that you earn.
Your years of showing up.
Your years of showing up.
I'm not so sure I'd call it experience.
And for the credentials that you earn. So do you get master's degrees in education in college? Right. Now, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that. The trouble is that it runs opposite with what we know about teachers. What we've learned in the last decade or so is that basically there's huge variation in teacher quality. They're not different. They are very different from each other. They're not the same and shouldn't be paid that way. We know that the teachers don't really get much better after the third year in the classroom. You're your worst in the first year. You get a little bit better after that for the next 2 years, and then you never.
After that, you relax.
After that, well, you might not relax, but the benefits to experience go away.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I think it doesn't run just counter to the way we should do with teachers. It really runs counter to the philosophy of workers altogether, which is in one's own initiative being the progress to one's performance and growth in the job.
Right. I mean, I think reformers tend to make that argument a little too strongly sometimes. I mean, I think I think the way that we hold up companies, and they're not quite as efficient always as we think they are. They're much more efficient than the public school system.
We've gone through a few companies that weren't so efficient.
Right. You could tell stories about how this would be a good system. The trouble is that we now know that we can study these things and study teachers, we know that these things that we thought were related to teacher quality, so experience, getting master's degrees, we now know really confidently has absolutely nothing to do with how well you perform in the classroom. And yet this is the only thing we pay teachers based on. So we need to really focus on a new system that incorporates what we've learned about teachers.
We really only have, we took about a minute left. What is the single thing that the system could do to improve teacher performance?
I mean, I think the single thing that I think we need to evaluate teachers better. So now,
on what ground? By what data?
I think test scores need to be incorporated. I don't think test scores are everything. I would never want to make all employment decisions based on test scores. But the fact that we have test scores and we can match them to teachers and use them to figure out whose kids are learning and whose kids aren't, and then we don't use that information is ridiculous. I think you should use that information to disaggregate between the good teachers and bad teachers, and then we should act upon that information.
Yeah, and after all, any company on planet Earth is judged by its bottom line. Why should education be any different? Right.
No one thinks I don't think anyone really believes that all teachers are exactly the same. Right. So why should we have a system that treats them that way?
Right. Exactly. You're hopeful, right?
Cautiously hopeful. I think we've made a lot of progress lately, and I think the tide has really turned on education reform in the reformist direction.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to ask you, but one of the things, let's see what happens if now no one can say anything, we can't talk about money, because now we have some more money from Washington, so let's hope that we'll see how much that helps. Anyway, I wanted to thank you for being on this show. I appreciate your being on. Thanks. You're watching Getting Your Money's Worth. I'm Judith West.